Hi again everybody. This time we will be talking about photography and time. Now this could be a boring movie about clocks. In the old days and even today you used to have a clock on the church tower. In other countries like here in Thailand they have a clock in the middle of the city, so it's apparently important that people can see the time. But as you know, we want these videos to be about genetically interesting things which everybody of you can then later use for your own photography. So we'll be looking at what is time in fact and what can we do with it in photography. So before we know what we can do in photography, we have to learn a little bit about what kind of aspects are there in time. Now if you look at a movie, that's a continuous sequence of images, so it looks like there's no issue with time, there's just time there. But a photo, a still photo as it is called, captures only one moment in time, so a particular moment in time. So what does it capture then? It captures the time of day, a year, maybe some nostalgia based on the things you see in the photo which don't exist anymore, a zeitgeist, which is the beliefs of a certain time, the culture and such. Changes, maybe you need two photos to see a change between before and after action and all that. So you have to ask the question first, what is time? Because it seems to be a difficult thing, maybe an elusive thing even to capture. So in fact, instead of you being able to handle time as something like that is there and it just happens and hopefully it goes okay, we will be telling more about time so that you will be able to play with some aspects of time in your photos. Now, in the Newtonian view, you can look at time as a succession of instants, moments in time, points on a line. And of course these points can also form an interval of several points, and then you get a certain duration of time, because the question is time just an infinite fraction of a second, or is it maybe a second or something? So we have here a part of a movie, we'll see later. We have a couple of photos of an event of African dancers on stilts, and something interesting happens. One of the dancers slips, you see him here, his legs go open in an angle, and then of course he tries to get up, but while he's doing that the other dancer also falls. This brings in a number of things, like there's a now, but there's also a past and there's also a future. The past is things that happened, especially of things, talking philosophically a little bit, things that are logically happened, so they're not deniable anymore, they're not changeable anymore. So what happened here, the first dancer has fallen and that has happened. The future is still uncertain. The second dancer here he has also fallen, but here he doesn't know he's going to fall yet. So this is things that are true, this is things that can happen, that will become true, but are uncertain yet. Now that's the physical time of all these things happening, with objects moving and forces and energies and whatever, but you also have the conscious time. The past is something that happened a little bit ago or a long time ago, so it's gone. And think of the present, think of the sun, for example, feeling the sun on your skin now at the moment. Although a memory of feeling the sun can also be nice, it's a totally different experience. So there's a now and the past also for you. So what is a series of photos in general, photos that can be related, they can be of the same city, or they can be of poor people, or there's some relationship. In time, there's a relationship in time, we call this a sequence. And if you have 25 images per second at least, there's enough images to make a smoothly moving movie as if we were really there, and then you have time happening. But in a photo it's not so clear to see what happened here. It's also the guy sitting here, we don't know that he fell down, he could just be resting. So here you see an image where there's lots of interesting stuff going on at different time scales. You have an old house here, which you would have seen a couple of centuries ago. Quite interestingly, it's still there in more or less the same way. Maybe they did a little bit of restoration. You have here a modern shop, which is already for rent, so in the future it will be a different shop. And why? Maybe because they have this construction here, and in this city it can take years for the construction to be repaired. So without wanting to be a philosophical talk here, because we're talking about time and photography, it is interesting to know that there are several categories of times, happenings of times, physics of time, etc. Firstly, there's the basic time. We already talked about the fabric of time in the Newtonian manner. Einstein also has something to say about. So you have space, you have time. This is still very symmetrical. Something can happen anywhere and everywhere, and it's just a happening. It's not so different whether it's 10 seconds ago or later. You need to have an arrow of time. We already know that the time normally doesn't go backwards, unless you're maybe in a wormhole or something like that. Also the elementary particles, electrons, unless you measure them to be somewhere, they're kind of everywhere around an atom in time, or every time in where, so that's also not so interesting yet. If you have a larger object, then there's many more probabilities to break a vase in different kind of breaking patterns than the one probability of the vase being together, which means that once it's broken, it's difficult to get it back together unless you have some glue. And this is a reason, this is why there's a definite, not just arrow in time, but also this is what creates these logically undeniable changes. Once the vase is broken, and it's not like the atom which would immediately spring into the other position again without any trouble. For us, it's mostly the fact that the Earth rotates once a day, which is an interesting division of time, that gave us our view on time. You have biological time, very important. Firstly, because, for example, you have some animals living in the very vast sea. They have to know exactly when to come together to spawn, to make children. But also in our body, everything has to work together in time, like hormones and the like, because otherwise you may get sick. Psychological time, very interesting. And now it becomes more interesting to start photographing, because you can photograph things like boredom or hecticness or such. So, for example, old people, you will always hear them tell they're at the end of their life, so they don't have many days left, and they're talking about, first of all, nothing happening because they're not at work anymore, they're sitting at home, and secondly, talking about how fast life went. Whereas if you're a child, then everything is new, so there's lots of things happening in a day, so it looks like the day is much longer, that there's much longer amount of time in a day. Cultural time, also very interesting. For example, the Indians, they would say, how far is something? Well, it's 5 moons, it's 5 days walking. So they may mix space and time in a manner that we don't. And there can be many different ways to interpret time in the different cultures. And lastly, there's sociological time, the time of our society. And that's where people mostly know time of, because lots of people are talking about time pressure nowadays, and that's because you have too many tasks to do in a day, and then it looks like you don't have enough time. But of course you have the same amount of time as otherwise, but too many tasks. So in photography there's one basic thing which you will always have, so I'll quickly say a little bit about that and then go into more interesting things, because this is more or less known for people. You need to collect photons. So you need to collect light for a certain amount of time and then convert it into a photographic permanent record. And you do that by opening your shutter. If your shutter was always open, you would get a fully white image with nothing to see. If your shutter is closed, you don't capture any photos. So you have a fast moving object, and then if the shutter is open for too long, you will get that position in space corresponds to time. So also time of shutter open corresponds to different positions, pixels where the light will fall from this object. So you will get a very blurred, smeared object if it's fast and the shutter is open for too long. If you have a very short opening time, you can also only see the UFO when it's over here, and then it's very sharp. So basically you can see things which humans can't even see, because humans, they just see always the same manner in an order of, well, a tenth of a second or something like that. And with photography you can open your shutter for a thousandth of a second, so you can, if you look at the same waterfall, for example, you can either see the droplets falling by themselves, which humans normally don't see because they go relatively fast, but you can also have very slow shutter, maybe even an entire day, and then you see the trajectory of the sun or something, also something which humans normally don't see. And here you see, for example, the trajectory of the rain droplets. Now you see they form a kind of parabola. People who did mechanics already knew that, but other people would discover that. So you see, interesting, the trajectory here. So you can freeze time. That's an example of playing with the now, exactly instantaneous. This bird, it's like it's hanging in the air. So basically it wouldn't experience something like this, because for him it would be a trajectory of flying from A to B and not consciously hanging at position A, B, C, D and so on. Even if you're fast enough, even planes can seem to hang in the air. And that's, these guys would also get somewhat of a surprise, because you see here on the one hand the planes hanging still, but on the other hand you see these grenades being shot. So that's also an interesting way to see things. So 1,000th of a second, that's enough to freeze this bird here, hummingbird. But this one is moving out and he's already accelerating to pick up more speed, so for him, his wings are nicely still with this shutter speed, but for him you would need even more, like 1/8000 or something. So you see here both, which is quite interesting. This brings us to a related concept, the concept of timing. So if you have fast action happening and there's only one moment which is interesting, or a couple of moments, and then the thing is over, then you need to be well on time. So if you have an orca and you have too slow a camera, in the old days people complained about their cameras that they had lots of photos of their shoes, because they pushed the button and then they turned the camera back down to put it in their bag, and only then a photo came out. So if you have that lag, then you would only see the tail of the orca disappearing again, and that's not so nice, of course. So timing is important. In fact, you have at least three related time scales and time moments. It's the moment now, so if you have a certain action happening, then there's a sub-action in that action. So if people are fighting, for example, the moment of a punch to the face, that's some very specific moment. There's the total span of the action itself, so the 3 minutes fight, for example, and there's the action in the time around it, so what happens after and so, the ambulance have to come and such and so. So here we have a good example of a good moment in time. I was looking at this turkey vulture, and if you know a little bit about animal behavior, and you know it's gonna fly away, so you have your camera already ready, and then when it's jumping, it first bends a little bit downwards to make a spring and get off the roof of the branch, and that's exactly the moment you see here, with its paws still stretched, his feet, and later on it will put them under his body. That Cartier-Bresson called that the decisive moment. So there's a moment which is more interesting than the others, and then there's of course many moments when there's nothing interesting. So here, for example, you had children playing in the spring, the autumn time, and they were hiding under a big pile of leaves, and then every time somebody came, then they jumped out of it they thought it would scare the person. And there's actually 4 children here under there, but yeah, well, it's interesting to show that some of them are still partially buried and some of them are already out of it, so that's a good summarization moment of what's happening there. So we've talked about very fast time, slow, short shutter speeds, and now we're going to see the other thing. If we blur time, if we compress it, lots of time into one photo, then you can get these kind of things. Now notice already you see a kind of pattern of movement, because this thing is much sharper than over here. So actually they come very fast and then they do a kind of standstill and a turn here. So and just before this standstill we took the photo. But of course it's still very fast, so you would get another photo if you took a somewhat shorter shutter time, but then these would not be so blurred. Here, for example, we have this rat. The fact that it becomes a little bit blurred makes it even more mysterious and scary, I would think. You can play with that. What I did here is I went past a lot of bicycles, and then you can have these wiggly patterns of the steering wheels of the bicycle and such. Same here with a multiple exposure. What you can do, you can take several photos on one image, one exposure, but you can also do what I did here is I took a building, you still see a little bit the bricks here, and I just pointed my camera towards a window in a certain orientation for, let's say, 2 seconds or so. Then I quickly turned it into another orientation, quickly turned it into another orientation. So you have these 6 or 7 orientations in the image, and then you get an interesting pattern like this. Experiencing time, of course, turtles, they're kind of slow, so they probably experience time very differently, especially if you're a baby turtle. When you come out of the egg, you have a long voyage towards the sea, although you're not so far from the sea, but these things are like smaller than a palm of a hand. Timelessness, this could be in the morning of a Sunday, I don't know if it was, but there's nothing happening on the street. There's only this guy looking into the shop, the art shop, and it's a very still kind of picture. Then you can play with the eras of time, and we all love the movies like Jurassic Park with dinosaurs and such. So, especially if you have a budget of Hollywood, then you can enact, and some people also have that as a hobby, enact entire, even potentially historically accurately, entire different eras. For example, the medieval time when they were eating like this, kind of some meat and some maybe some figs or some bread, and not too much fancy stuff. Potatoes were not known in Europe then because they came from the Americas, and lots of other stuff was also not known, bananas and so. So in still photography, the advantage is that you need to take only one photo, and you can do that with a small camera even, so you're very isolated, you can go everywhere and click. In cinematography, you need to have everything right, because you need to shoot the same thing maybe 20-30 times until the action is correct, because actors, they tend to have lots of slip of the tongue and such. And you have a scripted story, so you may need to go to a part of the city and make sure you arrange with the mayor that's blocked from traffic and such for 2-3 days or even more. And when you're doing that, you might as well build an entire medieval city there. But you need the budget for it. So. But also, if you go as just a photographer throughout the world, all these things are often still there. I went to South Africa here, and I found, I don't know exactly how old these mountains are, but some mountain ranges were there already 1 billion years ago. I came across this rhino I could have come across maybe not the same rhino, maybe his woolly grandfather, but a rhino a million years ago. This we could have seen 1,000 years ago. And this is of course Cape Town. It's maybe 10 years ago it would have looked more or less the same, unless they start building a very futuristic building over there, and then you can see, this is after this or that year. So in some places you still have all more or less, well, not exactly, it's never like in 1410 exactly then. There's always a spread of dates of buildings, and there's even these somewhat nasty modern day signposts, but at least as a scene, this city still looks like a very old city. You even have the cannon there, so if you want to shoot a movie or a photo session as if it was with also old clothes and such, as if it was 200-300 years ago, you could go in these cities. And you have, especially in photography, you can take a certain angle. If people have to walk, you need more area because they walk through it. But if you only have like 6 houses, it can look already like it's an entirely accurate city of 300-400 years ago. So some countries, they like to, this is in Shanghai, they like to cherish their old past. They have lots of modern buildings and not so many old stuff anymore, but here they have the garden, which looked like, at least to me, in the old days. Shanghai, what's interesting there, if you come there every year and you came the last 10-20 years, you would have seen all these buildings appearing one after the other, so it changes quite quickly. So you can go look for the past. These are klokkenstoelen. They are constructions that have a clock, a bell, in them, and you can announce that there's a fire or an enemy or something. And you can even relive the past, reenact the past. So one country especially which is interesting, for us at least, I don't know how the Cubans will look at that themselves, they will have their own vision on their own country obviously, but for us it looks like a country of the eternal 50s. We know that the Americans were important there, and then they were kicked out by Castro, and then of course there was the embargo. So for example the cars, they haven't really changed since the 1950s. So you can find all these old cars going through all the old streets, and that gives an interesting time nostalgia. And you see even it's changing now, because I heard that they are allowed to buy modern cars again, although with Trump I don't know, but you see that even in the street, and there's lots of old cars going. Some people don't even have the repair parts anymore, so you see these kind of relics, ruins of cars. Indeed, objects are things which very quickly changed, so they're a perfect way to show in what time a photo or a movie plays. So I went in the beginning of the 2000s, I went around my house in the streets to make a collection of the cars which were current then. And yeah, you do see some cars which were older than 2000, but which now seem to have disappeared more or less from the streets. Now most cars to me, they look either like this kind of or like this a little bit, and so it looks like there's only 2 more brands of cars in these days. In the old days you had all these kind of different interesting shapes. So this is, for example, an old computer. This is an even older quote-unquote computer. I have known the time before computers and also before mobile phones. So maybe I belong in this museum also, who knows. But there are people, younger generations, if you were born in 2000 or around 2010, you would have known the generation, you're the generation of the modern stuff, and you will have probably a different view on the world also than people of the old days. So it may be even a little bit difficult to relate to really dive into what happened and how people thought and lived in the old days. So this guy, for example, in Canada, he's still driving with a truck you may have bought like 50 years ago. But also people want to relive the past. It becomes a selling feature, it becomes interesting to have your eyes vending place in an old car. The time of the day, so we were talking about the time in million years, in hundreds of years, but also the time of the day is important, of course. You have here in the afternoon people all having a drink, and here is the early evening, start of the night. So if you go through a city, you can go when everybody's sitting on the seats and having fun, but you can also go a little bit earlier, like 4 o'clock or something, and then you see the restauranttiers. They are stuffing, they are putting down all their displays of all the food that you will be able to eat later in the evening. And it has to be done every day, of course, to be fresh. So all these kind of activities during a day can be found if you walk. Photography is walking. This is feeding time, for example, for birds, for animals. That's the most important time of day, at least if you're locked up. And then, of course, we talk now about specific times isolated, but there's also changes over time, of course, of things. You see here in these houses, long time ago, this kind of small workers' house was there, and then people started building more modern and even more modern. Here it's a little bit more subtle. The houses are there, but the cranes are already there, so probably maybe this is gonna be demolished, who knows. Here the same thing. There's one old villa between all the skyscrapers. This is near the coast, and so you have all these apartments for people who want to have a sea view. They come with the thousands. Sometimes if you go through a city you still find some old houses, so some relics of the past here and there. Much of it has been destroyed, but you do find, of course, these houses are not so modern anymore, sometimes not even sanitary to live there anymore, so they're for sale, probably will be demolished. The castle here, I heard apparently they're gonna build something to it, some hotel or some modern construction or something. Here also an old palace, but with a new thing in front of it. This change is very interesting to see. Imagine there's a stairs here. Somebody would have been walking here towards from his living room towards his, I don't know, bedroom or whatever. So anachronisms is if you have an object from one time in another time. So here you have a fantastic city hall, and then you have this modern parking garage under it. Not so very, well, it's an elegant solution from the point of view of efficiency and economy, but historically it's a little bit of a clash. Same here, this modern shopping center in an old building, and so they even came with this terrace which protrudes many meters in front of it. So yeah, some people will find that very elegant, married together, modernistic solution. It's also a little bit sad that if you were to shoot a photo or a movie here, nobody would think it was really like 300 years ago or so. Although in Italy they still, you have the cars, of course, going through the medieval city walls, but it still looks like, if you think away the cars, it could be like 200 years ago here. You could perfectly shoot original movies. Brings us to the concept of nostalgia. There's also some dilapidation here, but there's also some nostalgia. The old days of the big cinemas. Now people just get the movie on Netflix or so the cinemas, they stand there until maybe they get demolished. This is a very nice one I made. I found it very nice because it looks like it's a very modern gas station, but there's only these old cars getting gas there. So one other thing is also, one kind of change is the aging of stuff and even the decay. You see this skull here lying, this must have been an animal, but now it's in the streets. mold, fungus, rust. You can make all kind of nice things. You see, these books must have been new one day, but now they get this very interesting, nostalgic patinee, in fact, this look, this old book texture. It's difficult to even make it if you do computer graphics. A tin can that disappears, takes a long time, but yeah, still disappears. In some places, like here in Cuba again, they have these trains, they just, it's a regular service, so. Or even in some countries, they let you drive a car until it really doesn't start anymore. So in other countries, they would take this off the road, I would think. Same with the boat. I don't know if somebody still owns it and somebody's gonna still sail with it, but it's, at least it seems like it needs some cleaning. This is in Guatemala. And then nature starts taking over, even on this sea or this water construction. And then there's action. So there's defined things happening, it's a movement according to a prescribed pattern or script. Here you see the action, for example, from the children. This guy almost flies off from the speed. You don't really see that this turns, but from the speed you see that he's almost flying off. The girl jumps on. Here it's a little bit more difficult to see what's happening. You see this guy running, you see this guy jumping. Now this is a kind of a pole which rotates, covered in something soft, of course, so if you fall you don't hurt yourself too much, but it rotates faster and faster, and each time it's coming you have to jump over it, and the last one standing, I think this guy already fell, and so he's getting out of the arena now, and this guy is preparing. So the thing is, it looks like he's way too early, but because it's so fast, he was just in time. So a fraction of a second later, it will go right under his feet when he's just a little bit higher and just above the thing. Also here, it's right before the action. If you never played soccer or anything, you don't know what's happening here. So the boy may be backing up from the ball, but of course you see that he will be kicking the ball. I think he probably kicked the ball once before already, because it looks a little bit in the air. So that brings us to the question, if you have an action, which is the best moment for this action then to photograph it? So the before has all this tension, something is going to happen, but the moment of the action itself is often even more interesting, and then you know exactly what's happening. You see here these big rats. You could think they're kissing, but the fact that he's arched like that, in fact there's some tension and they are fighting. You see here people having to it's not such a heavy carnival thing, but they really have to flex their muscles to keep it in the right direction and not into the crowd. So here you have another nice pattern of action. You see this penguin bent, he's going to feed soon. This one is already bent a little bit, this almost not. This one is just standing there. When it's going to happen, when it's going to be my time. So even if you're not a penguin, you can kind of nicely see what they're thinking. Here you have the patterns of the movement of the rice, which comes out a little bit out of this sieve. Not too much, otherwise you lose the rice. Pattern of movement, jumping. So okay, we should finish on time, so thanks for watching. See you in the next movie. It does take quite some time, several weeks if you have to do it in the weekends or so, and not with a big team. But I still have lots of things planned on color and lenses and such and such. So have a nice day, and now go out yourself. Try to find you have some inspiration of what you can do with time, with aging, with dilapidation, with it's a very interesting topic, probably more interesting than you thought before watching this movie. So now you can go on with it yourself and look for some interesting time. subjects. Okay, bye guys.